Good evening, members and members of the public watching on the webcast. I'm Councillor Paul Cooper, and I'm the Chairman of Democracy and General Purposes Committee. Just a quick bit of housekeeping before we start. We're not expecting a fire alarm this evening, but if one were to sound, if you avert your gaze this way, and we'll decide on the best course of action. We'll move on with the agenda. Item number 1, apologies for absence. I have received apologies from Councillor Bartlett. Everyone else appears to be here, so that's good. Item number 2, substitute members. I'm aware that Councillor Hastie is subbing for Councillor Bartlett. And there are no other subs. Item number 3, urgent items. I'm not aware of any urgent items. Likewise, item number 4, there are no visiting members that I can see on the webcast or physically. Item number 5, are there any disclosures by members or officers? No. And item number 6, are there any disclosures of lobbying? I'd be surprised if anyone's been lobbied on this agenda. Item number 7 is, I propose that we hold all items in public session this evening. Is that agreed? Perfect. Item number 8 is the minutes of the meeting which was held last on the 31st of January 2024. Does anybody have any comment on the accuracy of the minutes? No? In that case, are the minutes agreed as an accurate record of the meeting? Is that agreed? Thank you very much. There are no petitions, there are no questions from members of the public. And there are no questions from members to the chairman. And item 12, committee work programme. Does anyone have any comment? No, in which case are we happy to note? There's nothing on it, so are we happy to note that? There are no reports from outside bodies that I'm aware of this evening, and Ryan is shaking his head, so that's correct. Which brings us on to item 14, member training 2024-25, which will be introduced by Mrs. Woodhouse. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Evening, members. So first of all, I'd like to start by thanking all of you who responded so kindly and in full when I asked for your input in terms of how we could help support new councillors, being aware that obviously we've got all out in May and we're likely to have a significant cohort of new councillors coming in. The feedback was really detailed, it was really helpful, and as a result we've included some additional information that we're going to give new councillors when they come in May. And we've also, as you'll see in the suggested programme, we're going to split the induction over 2 evenings, because a lot of the feedback we had was actually trying to give us all that information in one go in one day is far too much. Plus we're aware that we have quite a few councillors who work and have other commitments, so organising it in the evening rather than the daytime as we have done previously is going to be more helpful. And the other thing we put forward was to have sort of an officer buddy from the wider leadership team, so when you a newly elected councillor has someone straight away that they can go to with any concern or any query, and they should be able to direct them to the right person. And I appreciate that a lot of you have that supporting group as well, but we wanted to sort of reciprocate to make sure people are supported and looked after. In terms of the training for last year, we held a number of different sessions, including carbon literacy. We also held quite a few sessions on moving to whole council elections and how we prepare for a 4-year cycle, and again the contributions there have been really helpful. And we've done various briefings on the budget, also this committee on our governance model, and I know audit, governance and standards have also done quite a few briefings as well. So we've covered quite a lot over the last year, so thank you those of you who participated and attended training. I know it's extra, but it's very much appreciated. So in terms of looking ahead, as I've already said, the induction we're proposing to split over 2 days, and actually, 2 evening sessions. There'll be other sessions throughout the year to build. So we are planning to do things like tours of key sites and providing more information, but we don't want to give it all at once. So it will happen sort of over a drip feed. Another idea we've had is we're looking at making a video. So our comms team are pretty good with digital. So there'll be a video available to all councillors of who's who, as well as a guide, which I think could be quite useful. So you can see the different sites without having to go in person, but you've got a bit more of an idea, so hopefully it's a bit less daunting. And then we've got our usual training programme. So we're suggesting overview and scrutiny skills series covering chairing, questioning and recommendations, because I know that's something's come up this year. So in terms of how to write really good recommendations that have an impact. And then other training will be chairman's training and the Nolan principles. We will repeat the training we delivered earlier this year. It was very well received and positive feedback from those who attended. I think it was a good refresher and that chance to reflect on your role in public life and upholding those standards. And I think it was just a good opportunity to discuss that with other members. So we're going to run that again. And we'll also do further sessions on committee procedures and governance, because I know everyone loves the Constitution, so we need to make sure you all know how to use it appropriately. And then again, we'll run carbon literacy training as well as support for the Cabinet based on their portfolios, which we do already, but we would encourage and provide that support in the coming year, and the usual with planning and licensing. But I'm happy to take on board any suggestions. At my appraisal, there was a suggestion coming forward about equality, diversity and inclusion for members. So sorry if I've stolen your thunder, Councillor Jeffrey, but that's something I'm happy to add to the programme. We do it for officers, so I'm sure we can replicate something for members. So I'm happy to include that as well for the committee. Happy for me to put it on the programme. Thank you. Sorry if I went on.
You didn't go on, not a problem at all. Thank you very much, Angela. I've got Councillor English, followed by Councillor Cox. Clive, over to you.
Thank you very much for a helpful report. And it's because we're switching to a different electoral model, we have an opportunity, I suppose, because we get out currently, we have members of the council joining us, that generally every year it has been, and it, you know, sooner finish one set of inductions and you're thinking about doing the next set of inductions. So what we have here is an opportunity to take a more considered longer term approach. There'll still be by-elections, of course. In fact, there'll probably be more by-elections because that tends to happen with this model. But the generally it gives us more chance to have a more considered model. And one thing I would say is that in terms the tour and the extended induction is a good idea, but in terms of recommendations and how to use committees and get outcomes, I know you referred to that in relation to scrutiny, and it's useful there, but it's not just scrutiny, it's every part of the council over the last decade has struggled with, we'll have a good debate, and then everyone struggles at putting that into a form which would vary with whatever the official recommendation was, apart from planning, which is used to doing that. So we need to make sure that people have the tools to do the job, because whatever model of constitution we've got, if you haven't got the tools, people are going to moan about it. So, so that's one thing. The second thing is that I have observed that we do have training, but we do have a training budget, but people are very loath to actually ask to go to training that is organised by people like the Westminster group, and I think only myself, Councillor Spooner and Councillor Round in recent years have partaken in that, and I think that's because there's a lack of knowledge amongst members that budget exists, and a diffidence in actually asking to spend it. So good though our internal trainers are, it's often best to get training in specialised areas from experts, and we are really not very good as a council appointing members towards those. So every year we end up, it's not a huge budget, but every year I reckon it's underspent. So that's that. And thirdly, I am aware that the Chief Executive spoke to South East Employers, an executive recently, about getting some training support. Contrary to the name, South East Employers, like the LGA, in some ways better than the LGA, actually does produce a lot of support for member development, not just as an employer. So there are organisations out there, so and it's often better to get people in, partly because of the expertise and partly because councillors and staff will often find it easier if a possibly unpalatable message is being given by someone who isn't part of the council.
Thank you very much, Councillor English. Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much. Concur with what Councillor English has just said. Also, I think you'll find we're all members of the LGA and we get lots of emails telling us about the things that are there. So I agree, though, we should be told that we could apply to have external or funding from the council to further our education. The only point I'd like to make is in under 3, the available options, where it lays out that the chairman's training, Nolan principles, are going to start in June. There are going to be meetings, though, at the end of May, and we're going to have choices of the chairman. So don't you think we need to have at least the chairman's briefing and how that works for chairmen who are going to end up sitting on meetings straight away? It's a bit like when I'm got a bit confused about having people that can sit on planning, yet they haven't done the training. And then when you get halfway through the year and they go, you haven't done the training, so you can't sit now, it seems a bit bemusing that we can go on for a certain amount of time but not actually have the training. So I do wonder whether is there any scope to have May until July and see if we can get some basics down for the Nolan principles and certainly the chairman's training and along those lines.
I have to say I've never undertaken chairman's training. I don't think it's a regulatory requirement, but my understanding is that chairman's training is designed to give people more confidence and to assist. So whilst I do see your point, Councillor Cox, I think it's not sort of something that's done very quickly before chairmen take over, and perhaps the opportunity might want to be extended to people who aren't chairman but perhaps want to develop their role within the council as well. But I don't know if Mrs Woodhouse has anything to say on that.
So in regards to May meetings, the majority of those are the SNAP meetings we hold just to appoint the chair and vice chair, rather than fully you walk in, you're expected to chair the meeting, though I do take on board your comments. The second part of the induction on 15th of May will include committee basics, so it will go through running a committee meeting. So based on your feedback, we can include some basic points on chairing as part of that training. That's probably the most useful. And I'll give some consideration as to whether we could put together a guide. There's probably some guidance out there we can perhaps share with people who are chairing, especially if they're brand new to it.
Because I also put whoever the mayor's going to be in that box, because sometimes people can chair the meeting after not being a chairman for quite a long time and find it quite overwhelming. So I would certainly be partaking of whatever training was offered. So I just think it may be a bit more all-encompassing. So
I couldn't imagine that any of the contenders for mayor or deputy mayor next year would indeed need any chairman's training, but perhaps I'm wrong, Councillor Cox. Councillor Hastie.
Sorry. Thank you. I didn't really want to have massive input or change or have anything to say, but just to say thank you for listening to all of the members and for everybody, and for yourself and your whole team for everything you've done. And I know it's going to be quite a massive turnaround next year, and with all of the kind of democracy stuff as well going on, I think you've all done a really, really, really good job, and I just wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hastie. And I would like to add to that. When I saw this, I think the broad shell of what is required is encompassed quite nicely there. Now, I think it is worth us making a few points because things can be improved. But I think it would. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people will disagree. But I think the broad thrust of what is in there is what is required. I'm going to go to Councillor Rose, followed by Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just thinking about an experience that I had, and possibly I spoke to a colleague who hadn't really thought about that situation, and it may be not just first elected, but people who have been elected, and that is the availability of being able to speak to officers. One of the problems I have in my ward is parking, and I felt very helpful to be able to work with the traffic division in Maidstone Borough and be able to be on the same page, as you might say. And because we're working together because of parking, I think it has made a very helpful link. And I'm just wondering if obviously you don't want to be running to offices all the time, but there again, we do work together. And so I'm just thinking that possibly it might be worthwhile just to be able to say that officers are available to be able to discuss with councillors. And I found it very helpful to be able to talk to an officer in parking. And of course, as I say, personally speaking, it does make a link between you and the officer to be able to work for the resident in the best way possible. So I think that's something that I think is worth really thinking about. It might be something that you think possibly might be obvious, but as I spoke to a colleague and said, oh, you know, I just spoke to an officer, but, oh, I didn't think about doing that. You know, so I think that could be something that would be very helpful. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. Paragraph 2.3 has covered that quite nicely, and I think it's quite important that we do take that on board and make sure that not only do officers correspond in the spirit of openness to all members, but to ensure that we signpost members to the correct officers, which is why it says here that we'll be providing a who's who guide of key officers and services, making this available in digital form. So hopefully in future you'll know exactly who to go to. Thank you. And Councillor Webb, please.
Yes, I'd just like to echo how good this document is in terms of the future development of members. Under 3.1, you've got one of the bullet points is follow-up session on committee procedures and governance in September. There is a dark art, isn't there, here? The dark art being called the Constitution. And that Constitution has been exceptionally well written, and I wonder whether members, some members, might like to have a training session or a greater understanding of the Constitution, and whether that can be fitted, whether that's fitted within that section, or whether it's a training session on its own. Thank you.
We could re-employ John Pearl to do some consultancy work for us, perhaps.
I'll second that.
No, I would echo that, because on a serious note, I'm probably better acquainted with the Constitution than most, but every now and then Councillor English says, I don't know why you didn't do it that way. Yeah, I think that would be good, and there are a few dark arts in there, and actually there are a few quite important things that we do need to make sure all members are aware of. Councillor Cox.
Very small point. I don't know whether I put it back in my feedback. One of the courses I remember taking and made such a difference. I didn't go to university or anything like that, or I'm sure you'd have been taught things like speed reading, because it was a course that I did and I really found it very useful. So if that's available, I would certainly go on it again, weirdly, but as with all of this training, I'm glad to see it's open, obviously, to all, but speed reading one was very good.
I'll second that. Do we have any other comments? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to echo comments that have been made around the Chamber earlier. Excellent reports and excellent stuff here. I hope that should I have the good fortune to be re-elected in the forthcoming elections, that it will be possible for members in other than their very first year to attend these sessions, because I certainly feel as if I've merely skimmed the surface of things up till now. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thompson. So I can see that Angela has taken a lot of notes, and I'm fairly confident that she will diligently take those away and involve it. But the report is for noting, so members, is that noted? Perfect. Fabulous. That takes us on to item number 15. I hand over once again to Mrs. Woodhouse. I'm not going to allow that. I hand over to Mrs. Woodhouse again for members' access to information procedure rules annual review. Sounds like a barrel of laughs, doesn't it?
Yes. So just to draw your attention really, it's in the Constitution that annually there'll be a report on access to information and how many of we report on how many went into Part 2 in terms of decision making, and we also talk about if any members have requested copies of those papers and whether that right was fulfilled or denied, and how that was dealt with. So this year the maths is wrong, so I apologise for that in the report, and I'll wait for someone to tell me. So we had 66 decisions, and 6 had Part 2 appendices. So we also had one decision where the report was fully in Part 2. And to be fair, that report, I did review it, they did seek my advice, and it would have become a nonsense if we tried to separate it into a Part 1 front sheet and a Part 2, and a Part 2 appendix. So it's only in very exceptional circumstances that we've actually put a whole report into Part 2. And I think officers and the Cabinet have worked very hard to make sure that everything that can be in the public domain is, and we restrict it to a Part 2 appendix where it has to be. And to be fair, all the Part 2 appendices, when you look in terms of decision making, a lot of it has been related to property, and it's been about commercial, financial, business affairs. So it's fairly straightforward in terms of those reasons, and there was nothing surprising when I looked through and did the review, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. And can I just say from the chair, so it was actually one of the reports that I brought to this, not to this committee, sorry, but to PIDE, that was done in entirely in Part 2. We did feel that there was no way, unfortunately, to do that. But throughout the whole year, with the exception of the Chief Officer's appraisals, which I've been involved in, I've only entered into Part 2 twice. Once was when I was sitting as Cabinet member and introducing a report, and the second occasion was about an hour and a half ago, when we were discussing, we wanted to ask some questions about the commerciality of a commercial asset. So I think that has worked very well from my perspective, and I'm certainly very keen to to have as little as possible in Part 2. I think it's worked really well over the course of this year, and I know that certainly Councillor English and I, amongst others, had great nervousness about the rules within the Constitution, and I think it might be fair to say that some of us still didn't think that the rules had gone far enough in terms of allowing members access. However, I'm pleased that I wouldn't necessarily say I'm proven wrong, but I'm pleased actually that our concerns were unfounded, and as it seems to be something that has worked very well, and you know, I think we need to give maximum praise to the advice that we were given from the team by whom I'm flanked. If I can come first to Councillor English.
Yes, I wouldn't say absolutely every issue has gone away. The remaining issue is not really covered by this report, which is the precise demarcation line. There's still where you divide councillors' right to know. That is something that's still a work in progress, I think. But in terms of this specific report, in terms of the actual decisions and meetings, which is what this relates to, I would have to say that there are very few concerns. As the chairman has said, all of these Part 2 discussions are clearly the sort of discussions that clearly fall within the legislation as exempt information. The council has very, very carefully looked at these things and has kept the number of those occasions down to pretty much the bare minimum possible, really. And at least in terms of that part, the access to information issues, I'm content that despite one or two questions earlier in the year, that there have from certain people, there have been no problems with information being discussed in part 2 when it shouldn't have been. It's been kept to the minimum. Those concerns that do exist are completely not associated with the particular matters that are on the papers this evening. So I would say that the officers and members, including the Cabinet, have done a good job on this one.
Councillor English, thank you. Councillor Webb.
Yes, it's just a point of clarification, if you don't mind. Perhaps I'm being particularly dense tonight. I do understand the difference between Part 2 and Part 2A. That's the bit that I get confused about. Because if a paper or a report is exempt in Part 2, why is the appendix to that paper Part 2A? Surely aren't they the same?
Yeah, it's just for reference on the table, really. So it's not something we'd use anywhere else in terms of when we're describing it. So it's just a way of distinguishing between reports where the whole report was Part 2 and reports where only the appendix had the Part 2 information. So sorry for the confusion. I'll try and find a better way of labelling it next time. No, it took a while for me to get my head around it as well. So
that's fine. I feel so satisfied now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nobody else has indicated to speak, so is that noted, members? That's it. Well, I'm rather hoping that unless there's some sort of democratic emergency in the next few weeks, that this is the last meeting of this municipal year. So I'd like to thank everyone for making these meetings quite smooth and largely enjoyable. And I wish you all a very good Easter, and I declare this meeting closed.